The South African National Defence Forces 2026 Armed Forces Day Parade, set to cost more than 370 million rand, is facing tough criticism. The Congress of South African Trade Unions has urged government to cancel the costly spectacle scheduled for later this month in Limpopo, calling it a grotesque waste of funds amid a cost of living crisis. COSATU argues that the funds should instead be used for critical operational shortages within the SANDF. COSATU Parliamentary Coordinator Matthew Parks tells us more. Very good morning to you, Matthew. Thank you for joining us. So you, as COSATU, described this as a grotesque waste of funds. What are your main concerns regarding this cost that's been allocated to this parade?
Good morning, and thank you for having us. So I think there are three fundamental concerns. Number one is that last year, or in the current budget year, government said it has so little money, it needed to do a 2% VAT hike. That was rejected by Parliament and society. But government did get a tax increase through the back door by not adjusting income tax brackets for inflation for the second year in a row. About 2 months ago, the Minister for Finance told Parliament that there may be a need for further tax hikes in the new financial year, which is due to be tabled at Parliament in a few weeks. So it makes no sense. Either government is broke or is not broke. But when you increase taxes upon working middle-class families, and then at the same time they must witness what really is an extravagant waste of money, it sends a terrible message. Also, I think our concern is that if government has funds available, then it should utilize these funds in a more strategic way. It should hire the nurses, the doctors, the teachers, the police officers it is committed to hiring, who provide a valuable frontline public service which benefits working class communities and society at large. And equally, we would expect this money to be utilized to plug many holes in the National Defence Force. There are huge problems in the Defence Force. We have aging planes, ships, submarines, land vehicles, etc. We have an air radar defense system which is barely working. We have reports of trucks which can't be used because they have not been serviced in more than a year. They're flat tires and so forth. The condition of our barracks where our soldiers sleep every day is dilapidated, to put it politely. When our members of the Defence Force have gone on peacekeeping missions and risked their lives, and many have actually died in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Central Africa and so on, there have been constant reports about a lack of air support, lack of land support, lack of armory or protective equipment and so forth, exposing them and many of them paying the ultimate price. These same soldiers who were in the DRC, we had to intervene last year when they didn't get paid their allowances. And even when they did get paid, the Defence Force decided to pocket half of them. So there's a crisis of a shortage of funds, and the Defence Force leadership itself has correctly claimed, raised alarm bells about budget cuts and the impact of budget cuts in the Defence Force over the past decade or so. So we had that crisis. What's more alarming is that we've had reports from members of the Defence Force reaching out to us across the country, complaining that when they should be getting 3 meals a day, which are even deducted from their salaries, they're now getting 1 meal a day because the Defence Force is so broke. So it makes no sense when the Defence Force doesn't have funds to fulfill its most fundamental tasks, to fulfill its constitutional mandate, that the generals can find 372 million rand to go on a parade. And a parade is fine. It's part of military culture. It's part of building discipline and camaraderie. It's part of a recruitment, public relations exercise to attract young people to join the Defence Force. But we have to have our priorities. And our priority must be to feed our members of the Defence Force, to make sure they live in decent conditions, to make sure they have the training to maintain their combat readiness, to have training for our flights, to maintain the pilot's licenses, etc., to make sure our land, sea, air vehicles are working, but not to spend it on a luxury. They could tone down the parade, they could cut it down by 90% like they've done previously. But this really, to us, smells of an extravaganza, and we wouldn't be surprised if some generals are looking to put the fingers in a cookie jar.
So, I mean, you described the situation at SANDF and just the lack of equipment and that which is needed in order for them to fulfill their duties. What do you think this current state of the SANDF's operational capacity, how does it impact on our national security?
It has a huge impact. Our soldiers, who since '94 have done a very good job in promoting peacekeeping missions across Africa, which benefits South Africa because we need peace in the continent for trade, for migration, for security reasons, etc. But when you leave them with the bare essentials, it makes it very difficult for them to fulfill their mandate. It has a huge negative impact upon their morale. We expect our defense force to patrol our more than 4,500, if I get the numbers right, kilometers of land borders across the country. But they barely have working vehicles. We could rather have used this money to invest in drones, to train our defense force members around how to manage the drones, to help improve border management control, to deal with the issues of human trafficking, the smuggling of stolen vehicles across our borders, the smuggling of drugs, of weapons, etc. Those could be utilized. We time and again correctly call upon the defense force to support the police, to assist government around disaster management. But if they don't have working vehicles, if they don't have the trainers to maintain combat readiness, they're going to struggle to fulfill that mandate. We have a huge problem of poaching of our fishing stock inshore along the coastal areas where coastal communities depend upon fishing for their livelihoods. There's huge amounts of poaching by domestic and foreign vessels, but we barely have any working ships to patrol our seas. And that again robs working poor rural communities of their livelihood. So I think for us, it's about getting the priorities right. And clearly right now in the Defense Force, our generals don't have a sense of what are the priorities.
And you mentioned earlier that if generals were to push forward with this, there could be possibilities of hands in the cookie jar. How much does corruption contribute to the decay, especially of such institutions?
We think it has a huge impact. Normally the budget we've understood for this kind of Defense Force parades, which take place once a year, is about 30 million rand. And if that was the case, we wouldn't make a noise about it. We understand that this is part of military culture and so forth. But 372 million rand is just extravagant. If you compare that to the State of the Nation address that Parliament hosts every year, where there is a military parade, albeit smaller, where there's a flyover, again, albeit smaller, that costs about 3 million rand. And Parliament has done well to heed the frustrations of society, of taxpayers, to be modest in how it spends public funds. But in this instance, the military appears to have gone deep off the deep end. Perhaps it coincides with the Chief of the Defense Force pending retirement, and he wants to go to the bang. But that's a terrible message to send, and it's not going to boost the morale of the Defense Force members. When members are told to sort themselves out after getting 1 meal a day, you're not going to boost the morale by spending a fortune on a parade. In fact, you're going to worsen it. And we think if you continue to squeeze Defense Force personnel members, at the very least, you upset the morale. You'll see some skilled personnel leaving and so forth, going to better paying jobs in the private sector. But also, these are highly trained military personnel. You should be wary of provoking them because you can get a mutiny. And that's something as a country we can't afford to have in our reputation.
And I mean, you do speak of this being important for national unity and morale, that it is part of military culture. But if you speak that if the State of the Nation address only uses about 1% of what this current budget is, it certainly is a call for concern. What do you then think would be the potential consequences if government does proceed with this parade?
It's going to further create a distance between the leadership of the state and society. We're going to the budget speech in Parliament in about 3 weeks' time. We've seen an increase in salaries for politicians and judges for about R500 million. We're now spending 372 million rand on a military parade to amuse the generals. So that's nearly R1 billion. If government can come with tax increases proposals for the budget speech, that's going to irritate society to a significant degree. And you can find if you continue to offend and irritate society, people stop paying taxes. You have a tax revolt. People look for ways to dodge taxes. And that creates a crisis for the state because the state needs a high rate of tax compliance to fund hospitals, clinics, schools, police stations, universities, etc. It's also really going to begin to demoralize our Defense Force members who don't get paid a lot of money, who live in poor conditions, who themselves are workers who've got to support families, come from rural areas and townships, and they too expect their rights to be respected. So I think for us, really it's a symptom of a crisis of leadership in the Defense Force. We've been seeing worrying instances of behavior by our Defense Force leadership in the past year or so, engaging matters which are quite problematic, venturing in unconstitutional territory when they engage in politics and so forth. At the same time, they're not maintaining their own house. And I think for us, they should be focusing on the conditions of our sailors, of our pilots, of our military personnel, and make sure they are given the full support they need to fulfill their duties. Our Defense Force members are hardworking, they're patriots, but they have the right to 3 meals a day. They have the right to live in decent barracks. They have the right to be properly trained. and to have working vehicles and sufficient protective gear when they do their jobs. And right now, the leadership of the Defense Force is failing them, and we think it's time the President intervenes to make sure the Ministry, the Department of Defense, the SNDF, their leadership are held accountable. And if they can't do the job, then they should simply be shipped out and appoint competent leadership.
All right. Matthew Parks, thank you so much for your time this morning. That's COSATU parliamentary leader Matthew Parks speaking to us there about that parade that's set to take place for the SANDF later this month.